This is Block 10, the 60s, Part 2, Black Power, with the section, the Black Panthers. The Black Panthers were kind of the radical result of this idea of black separatism and black nationalism. It was a paramilitary organization that took it upon themselves, and here are the Panthers, took it upon themselves to provide the enforcement for the separation of black nationalism. That black communities, would, there'd be Black Panther, the Black Panther Party, Black Panther units in black communities, and they would kind of enforce this separation. Now, they were focused in Oakland. Now, Oakland was the where their presence was felt the strongest, but all over the nation, they conspicuously carried assault rifles on the streets in their neighborhoods and pretty much dared the police to disarm them, and dared the police to come and provide law and order in black communities. They said they would do it themselves. They preached that the ghettos were their own territories, and that officials of the government, especially the police, who they called pigs, were not welcome there. Black self-sufficiency was the watchword. Now, in terms of the motivation of these Americans, many of them were idealistically motivated, and they worked to do things like improve schools, improve neighborhoods, provide, food and services for, people in their communities that needed those things. But many of them were also after power and violent confrontation and personal enrichment. That, there was constant infighting among the leadership of the Black Panthers, and many of their leaders were killed by other factions. So you really kind of had to take it on a case-by-case basis, but in terms of motivation at least. But, it's very difficult to have a country when, the police can't go to certain neighborhoods in the city. White radicals, people like the Weathermen, who we're going to see them in a few minutes, supported the Panthers and said that they were a reasonable reaction to white racism, and there was quite a bit of white racism, of course. And they also said, a lot of white radicals noticed their own jealousy at the Panthers' willingness to resort to violence to achieve their ends. They said, they were willing to pick up the gun, as they said. And the Panthers were, until they kind of shot themselves in the foot and kind of destroyed themselves with infighting, were a powerful force within the black community. Stokely Carmichael was an early advocate of black power and the Panthers. And he was a radical who preached that black America would smash everything that Western civilization had created. And in his mind, and in the mind of most of the 1960s radicals, black or white, Western civilization stood for capitalism, which was oppressive. It stood for imperialism, which was oppressive. It stood for racism, which was oppressive. It stood for Christianity, which was oppressive. And, black Americans were going to create their own authentic environment, their own back to Africa kind of movement. That, before slavery had ripped so many millions of Africans away from Africa, everything was hunky-dory and wonderful, and everybody lived in peace and brotherhood and all those sorts of things. Stokely Carmichael was, supported by white radicals who believed the same thing as he did. Black power, which is here, the symbol was the closed fist, and this picture here is the famous picture from the 1968 Mexico City Olympics, where these two American athletes, on the medal stand, instead of saluting the flag, gave the black power symbol, was the idea that blacks should remove themselves culturally from white America. And it began as a simple effort to exercise, the rights that they had worked so hard to win, political rights, social rights, economic rights. But to many blacks, and to all blacks, who believed in this, black power implied black pride and black separatism and black nationalism, and they rejected mainstream America. They did not want to join Martin Luther King's idea of brotherhood. They did not want to be mainstream Americans because to them mainstream America was racist and oppressive and capitalistic and Christian and all those things that they rejected. They rejected the fact that, they should be heir to Jefferson, Lincoln, and Martin Luther King. They chose not to emphasize their Americanness, but their Africanness. And that's where the term African American came from. And they emphasized their distinctiveness and their difference, not their similarities with mainstream American culture. And they, emphasized these things by wearing African-style clothing, growing out their hair into afros, and avoiding giving their children quote-unquote white names. And started to get all that creativity you see with names in the black community. And this was a reaction, that part of the black community reacted like Martin Luther King, wanted to join mainstream America, but for a lot of blacks, that was unacceptable, and they wanted something else, and they wanted something different, and black power and black nationalism, and then in extreme cases, the Black Panthers were their reaction. Black radicalism and separatism and nationalism kind of died out among most blacks by the mid-1970s, and they kind of picked up the pieces of that belief and simply, in a lot of ways, tried to join the American mainstream. But this is still a strong undercurrent of black thought, especially in urban areas, not so much among all the tens of millions of middle-class blacks, but it's a powerful idea, and it's still with the United States in a very fundamental way.